I got the Sequoia cart out for another test run, and then went around and did a quick inspection, make sure everything looked okay. And just want to point out that I don't have the front calipers mounted and haven't for these tests we've been doing, just because of the additional drag. I wanted to test it without that or whatever, but we do have a functional disc brake on the rear. But also, speaking of that, when I was running that last test, kind of what made me stop and do a quick evaluation was I kind of heard the knobbies of the tire rubbing on the fender. And when I heard that before is when the lug nuts were loose. But the lug nuts are not loose, and our bearings and everything is fine. But there's very little clearance between our wheel and the fender now. I had at least, I'd say, between a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch. So I got out our little manual caliper here just to check. And at the top, we're coming in, focus on this. It seems to be just a little over a 1/2 inch. I don't know why that won't focus. But then down here at the bottom, just that out there, that's almost 5/8. Maybe not quite 5/8. But see the difference? Good 30-second or so. So I believe our rear axle is bending upwards, because everything else looks fine and intact. And I think them stupid ruts over there at our track has been beaten on it. And we've even got rear suspension, so should have helped absorb the shock. But the reality of the situation is the tire is closer to the fender, almost rubbing now, and we can see a measurable difference between the top of the rotor to the backing plate, I guess you would say, and the bottom of the rotor to the backing plate. So I would say if we run it much more, we're just going to end up bending it more. So a lot of so's. I think we'll maybe over the winter redesign a rear trailing arm, because it just connects to the back of the frame there. So, and then have the shock absorbers, so it's not going to be a tremendous hurdle. Just I wanted to try doing a concept like this. The idea was to be able to quickly change the rear wheel without taking a bunch of stuff apart or messing with the chain or the brake, and we accomplished that. But I don't know, maybe having to be able to quickly change the rear wheel, it isn't that important, I guess. I guess it's an opinion situation. But okay. So I think we might be done for the season with the Sequoia cart. We've got some data we can evaluate, and we'll go from there. Another thing I'd like to talk about maybe a little bit is the drag of the motor, and also what affects, I guess, reverse feed to the motor. So, you know, like when you accelerate, the motor is making the wheel go. But then, let's say you let off to coast. The motor stops making the wheel go, but the weight and mass of the cart is still, you're trying to coast, but it's forcing the motor, and that's creating drag. But also, from what I understand, motors are generators also if ran backwards. So not that we're going to get any type of regen feeding back to the batteries because we don't have the circuitry, but is energy still being generated, or is what's going on inside of the motor when the wheel is forcing it to spin? And also, how much is that slowing our cart down overall, forcing that motor to spin when we just want to coast? Whereas we seen in that other video with the freewheeling, when the motor stops making the wheel spin, the wheel spins free with the cart coasting, and the whole drivetrain comes to a stop. So it's not a drag on the system, and it's also not forcing or making the motor turn and doing whatever could be happening inside of there. A little bit out of my ballpark of the knowledge. So yeah, anybody got any insight on what happens inside of a motor when it's being back spun, I guess you would say? So any type of replies or feedback or anything, leave down below. More to come.